Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump both rallied. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for coming. We're going to get started in just a few minutes. But in the meantime, while we're waiting for folks to hop on, if you could share your name, pronouns, if you have an org or group affiliation, and your location in the chat so we can all get to know each other a little bit. And then we'll get started at 6:05, so in just a couple minutes. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. My name is Sophia. I use she, her pronouns. I work with YUCCA as a full-time staff person. Some of us are here together in person, but we're in different spots of the room, so we might have some delays when we switch speakers. But thanks so much for being here tonight, everyone. We have kind of a packed agenda, so I'm just going to keep on moving. But if you're just joining, again, please share your name, pronouns, org, and location in the chat so we can all get to know each other. This is being live streamed as well. Shout out to Jeff and Ale for coordinating that. And I'll just get going. Very first thing, YUCCA organizes across Tiwa, Tewa, Dene, Mescalero, Apache lands. We organize on stolen land. We acknowledge the ongoing impacts of colonization as the root cause of our separation from our Earth Mother and the extractive nature of our economy and energy systems. It's important that we acknowledge the violent past and present and the fact that our organizing in so-called New Mexico is taking place on lands that were violently stolen from Native caretakers. The fight for economic, social, environmental, and climate justice must be rooted in solidarity with the land and the water and the land defenders who have cared for this place since time immemorial. I want to go over also really quick the community agreements that we have set for our network meetings. These were created a couple months ago when we very first had a network meeting over the summer. So step back and step up, or like there's other words for that, but basically it means like if you tend to be a person that speaks a lot, to kind of like make the effort to step back and wait before you talk and let others take up space. And on the flip side of that, if you tend to be a quieter person, to make the effort to speak up more. No interrupting, let people speak for themselves, encouraging questions, criticizing an idea and not the person. And then letting the speaker have space to be heard, to operate smoothly. So one thing is to, if you're not talking, to please keep your microphone on mute. That causes a little bit of chaos in Zoom. I'm sure we're all used to that by this point of the Zoom world, but yeah, and then progressive stack, which I don't know if that will be applicable tonight because it's kind of like a presentation heavy meeting tonight. And then assume best intentions and ask for clarity. So at any point during the slides or during the meeting, if you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat. We have folks monitoring and like watching the chat. This is a little bit of an overview of what tonight is going to look like. So we're going to do just a quick YUCCA campaign update, and then we're going to have our teach-in on the PFAS rulemaking and the call to action that's coming up in the next couple of weeks. We have some guests here from New Mexico No-Fault Solutions. We're going to be doing report backs on some traveling that they've done over the last couple of months. And then we're going to close out and have announcements. So everyone should be ready to hop off by 7 p.m. tonight. I'll just go into campaign updates, and folks, if y'all want to add anything while I'm talking. These first couple of pictures are from the climate strike in September, which is the New Mexico climate strike. We had this at Tigway Park in Albuquerque. This was the end of our summer youth fellowship, where we had speakers, performers, and food. It was almost entirely put together by the fellows. We celebrated and made art together, and kind of had this big contribution to our people's climate plan. So here are some other pictures. A lot of folks showed up. And then this is another update. On October 7th, we took direct action at the New Mexico Oil and Gas Association annual meeting, exposing the industry's profits as environmental devastation. So while NMOGA, or New Mexico Oil and Gas Association, celebrated their so-called success, we called attention to the 3 to 7 barrels of toxic waste generated for every barrel of oil, and the 33,000 plus spills reported this year alone. So we had a wall. You can see this is our wall of banners, and we were chanting outside of their gathering place in Santa Fe. This action was about more than disruption. It was a call to end New Mexico's dependence on fossil fuels and pressure policymakers to invest in just sustainable solutions that protect people and the planet. So this is just some pictures from that action. A lot of folks showed up to that with us. We do that every year. They expect us every single year, and we have these banners now that can be reused, right, for other actions that show the devastation of the climate crisis. And then this next update is going to be related to the rest of the evening. But on Monday, October 21st, YUCCA and our partners staged an oil spill demonstration outside the New Mexico State Capitol to expose the dangers of PFAS, also known as forever chemicals. PFAS are widely used in oil and gas operations across New Mexico and are linked to severe health risks like cancer. These chemicals persist indefinitely in the environment, threatening our public health, our water, ecosystems. So part of this action was we delivered over 4,700 petition signatures to the governor's office, demanding a ban on PFAS chemicals and full chemical disclosure from the fossil fuel industry. So later tonight, we'll go over this petition in detail and how to take action during the hearing and the public comment in the next couple of weeks. So I will pass it over to Enity now. Wait, hold on.
Yeah, good afternoon, y'all. So as you have just heard from Sophia, we are actively working to respond to the PFAS rulemaking petition that will be happening on November 12th at the Oil Conservation Commission, also referred to as the OCC. And just to give a brief introduction, my name is Enedy Lopez. I am the Policy Campaign Manager at YUCCA. And yeah, thank you for coming. We know that this is a good chunk of today's meeting, and really just appreciate you guys having coming in and being open to hearing from us and learning from us. But to start off, what is PFAS? So PFAS, also known as per and polyfluoroalkyl, sorry, I can't really pronounce that, substances that are also known as forever chemicals. Sometimes you'll hear it used interchangeably with PFOAs, so like it's PFAS with an O. But PFAS is essentially different chemical components that do not degrade easily in the environment, right? Since the 1950s, PFAS has been used in commercial products. So this means that it can be found on nonstick cookware, waterproof clothing, dental floss, water bottles. But most importantly, the focus of the rulemaking petition next month is around oil and gas operations. In previous policy initiatives across the nation, PFAS, they have been able to remove PFAS from consumer products. But the issue is that new PFAS chemicals are being created. And so tracking them and limiting their use as of lately has been pretty difficult. And in this moment, we're primarily concerned with the use of PFAS in the oil and gas industry. The main reason, because we don't know what's in these chemicals. We don't know what these chemicals are exposing our communities to. And what we do know is that at the moment they're being protected, or at least the chemical components that make up PFAS in oil and gas operations are currently protected under what is known as trade secrets, right? So trade secrets are legally protected secret practices or processes that companies use to conceal information from the public. And that's because the secret is deemed to have some sort of economic value. So the justification for trade secrets is this idea that, the public and even competitors aren't aware of what the practice or what the process or what the manufacturing process is, which gives them a leverage economically, right? But the issue is that no one, which ranges from public health researchers to scientists to local environmental regulators, landowners, the general public, such as us, know what is composing of these PFAS chemicals. So we might not know if this is in our, drinking water to resources. We don't know if it's in the air, if it's in the land that we might be using. So the main issue with trade secrets is the fact that because of this law, PFAS is not mandatory, or it's not required to be made available to the public. So this is a graph, an image from the Physicians for Social Responsibilities report, Fracking with Forever Chemicals, where they looked at New Mexico and they looked at the use of PFAS. So between 2013 and 2022, we know that the oil and gas companies injected more than 3,600 New Mexico wells with surfactants. So a type of PFAS, right? Can include multiple forms of PFAS. But because of trade secrets, we don't know what exactly that chemical composition is made up of. Can we go on to the next slide, please? And so our main concern is, while we don't know what these chemical components are made up of or what people are being exposed to, we do know that it's being used in fracking operations. So we know that the oil and gas industry is injecting or using PFAS in their operations. So when those operations are done, that results in wastewater. It results in waste. So we know that this waste is either being injected in wastewater wells, stored in pits, or simply injected into the earth itself, right? So earlier, the last network meeting that YUCCA had, we were talking about produced water. So produced water is fracking wastewater. And so fracking wastewater has these unknown chemical components. And so this means that while it's being injected either in the ground, in wells, or in pits, it's difficult to regulate as to the exposure that is giving, right? It can either be in the air, it can be in the water, it can be in the ground. It could be within our proximity. We don't know. So we know that in New Mexico, oil production has increased sevenfold in roughly the past decade, resulting from, developing 65.5 million barrels of oil in 2010 to more than 457 million barrels in 2021. So we know that between 2013 and 2022, the oil and gas companies had disclosed that they had used fracking chemicals in about 9,066 oil wells across the state. But out of those 9,066 oil wells, about 8,200 of them, so over 90% of those wells, had at least one trade secret chemical in use or was used in that operation in that well. So we know that during this period, so between 2013 and 2022, about 240 million pounds of trade secret chemicals in this time period were used. So that means that while that was actively being used, that was also actively contaminating our communities and also actively contaminating the environment. What we have learned from doing this process with Wild Earth Guardians and New Energy Economy is that the oil and gas industry has spills of their fracking wastewater 4 times a day. And so because of these spills, it's within proximity of community. So it can just be down the street. It can be in front of someone's yard. It can be in someone's yard. But there's at least 4 spills a day from oil and gas operations. And the primary issue we have with that is that it poses a risk of contaminating our fresh and groundwater resources and just contaminates the area that it takes up. And I will pass it. Oh, and then could you go on to the next slide, please? And this is just a graph from the Fracking with Forever Chemicals report by the Physicians for Social Responsibility, where they had tracked as to which wells in New Mexico may have potentially had these different PFAS components, these trade secret chemicals or suffocants, and reporting on like the mass that they found, right? So across the state, you can see that the mass is being measured by pounds, the number of wells in which they had found that total mass, and also as to just displaying the gravity of the impact it has on community members. But yeah, I will pass it to my colleague, Felicia.
Hola a todos. Thank you so much for being here today. My name is Felicia Guillen. I'm a steering committee member here at YUCCA. If you could go to this next slide, Sophia. And so I really want to talk about how PFAS is impacting our health and our communities, right? I think that's why we're all here, is because it's affecting all of us. And so as Anadith covered, PFAS is often referred to as forever chemicals because of their persistence in the environment. And they're linked to a large range of serious health issues. Research has shown that exposure to PFAS can increase the risk of various cancers, including kidney and testicular cancer. But beyond cancer, PFAS exposure also has been associated with thyroid disease, high cholesterol, and kidney disease. And so the chemicals are also known to have reproductive and developmental effects, posing additional risks to children and pregnant women. It's important to note that these health impacts occur at extremely low levels of exposure, which makes the presence of PFAS in our environment really, really concerning. The EPA has a very low threshold for PFAS in drinking water. This really highlights the significant health risks these chemicals, pose even at small amounts. Additionally, this is like not an abstract thing, like it's already impacting our communities right here in New Mexico. So in places like in Clovis and La Cienega, they're already experiencing the harsh effects of PFAS contamination. Because of high levels of PFAS in their local water supplies, residents in these communities can no longer safely rely on their tap water. They are instead forced to haul water back or to, drink bottled water for drinking and cooking, just to avoid contamination. And contamination reaches far beyond just drinking water. In some cases, residents have had to stop activities like fishing and hunting because of concerns about PFAS accumulating in local wildlife. In Clovis, additionally, the contamination was so severe that a local dairy farmer actually had to euthanize thousands of cattle after they were found to have high levels of PFAS. And so this is not just a health crisis, it's a devastating economic and lifestyle impact for everyone who's affected. So yeah, addressing PFAS isn't just an environmental concern. It's really a huge necessary step for protecting the well-being and livelihoods of all New Mexicans. Next slide. And so covered this briefly, but how does it impact land and water, right? How does the use of PFAS in the oil fields impact our land and water? So PFAS contamination is especially dangerous for groundwater, as Enedith mentioned, which is the primary source of drinking water for 87% of New Mexico's public water supply. So that means is that if PFAS contaminates our groundwater, it puts the majority of our water supply at risk. We're already in a drought. We already have limited water. And so this is just bad news. We can't do that. Additionally, there are multiple pathways for this specific contamination to happen. PFAS can leak through well castings if they are not properly sealed. They can also seep into groundwater from accidental spills and find their ways into aquifers through fractures in rocks. Once these chemicals reach our aquifers, they can also flow into surface water, which further spreads contamination, and it even makes it harder to control. I also just want to mention a huge issue here, which is lack of transparency from oil and gas industry, right? We're not surprised by this. Currently, companies are not required to disclose the chemicals they use in fracking operations, which means that our communities like ours are and residents and we're all put at risk. We remain uninformed about the specific contamination risks in local water supplies, and without knowing what chemicals are being used, it's challenging to assess and address the full extent of environmental damage or to take the necessary steps for protecting our water. And so yeah, just want to mention that this lack of transparency puts all New Mexico communities at risk, creating obstacles for monitoring, accountability, prevention of further contamination. And so addressing the issue of undisclosed chemicals is really essential if we're serious about protecting our health and our environment. Then I'll pass it to the next speaker, Melissa.
Hey everyone. Thank you so much for all of the work that you're doing to draw attention to this issue. I'm Melissa Troutman. I'm the climate and energy advocate at Wild Earth Guardians. And so myself and our staff attorney, Tim Davis, are responsible for this rulemaking petition and arguing it before the Oil Conservation Commission in November, which I hope many people on this call will join us in doing. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the actual petition before the Oil Conservation Commission. This is something that we started in 2023, but we amended our petition. We filed an amended petition just a few months ago in August to get around an obstacle that we encountered with the Oil Conservation Division. So the Oil Conservation Division is responsible for carrying out the rules, the oil and gas regulations, but it's the Oil Conservation Commission that actually has the authority to change those rules. So they're very similar, but also a little different. So the Oil Conservation Division, which carries out the actual rules, through some negotiations told us, well, we don't actually have the authority to require that manufacturers of these chemicals give us that information, because we can't regulate manufacturers, chemical manufacturers. We just regulate oil and gas companies, which posed a problem because originally our rulemaking petition asked that companies disclose all of the chemicals that they use. A, because we should know, and B, because some of those secret chemicals that they call confidential could be PFAS, and we don't know it because we don't know what they are. So we were like, okay, well, if you don't have the authority to collect chemical information from the folks that make those chemicals, then we're going to change that a little bit. And so our amended petition, basically, instead of requiring a full list of individual chemicals, we're saying, well, we're just going to ban any undisclosed chemicals. So the regulators do have that authority. So anyway, all that is to say that we kind of had to like move the chess pieces a little bit, but at the end of the day, what this petition is doing is three main things. One, it's banning PFAS in all oil and gas downhole operations, because what goes down the hole, what gets injected into the ground, poses a threat to groundwater, and it also comes back up as waste. The second thing that our rulemaking petition does is it requires community notification of what chemicals are used, so that the folks living in the areas where this stuff is being used get notified directly of what chemicals are being used and what those risks might be. And it doesn't just, I'm going to go back a little bit, apologies. The petition bans PFAS in all oil and gas downhole operations, and it also bans all undisclosed chemicals in all downhole operations. And it also requires community notification, and it also requires testing of oil and gas fluids for all chemicals when there's a mechanical integrity problem. So for instance, anytime that they lose pressure, because oil and gas companies are constantly monitoring the pressure when they're operating on a well, and if they lose pressure or have something like that happen, that could be a potential threat to groundwater because something is wrong with the mechanics downhole, then they have to stop and they have to test for everything. So that's what the petition is doing. I think I just want to add that, you know, the industry, we already know from some of the stuff that they've filed for their testimonies for this upcoming hearing, they're going to be making some arguments that we really need to push back on. And one of them is that, well, everything has PFAS, you know, like Anandith was saying, it's in cookware, it can be on cosmetics. The difference here is that the oil and gas industry is injecting it underground under high pressure in areas like the Permian Basin where there's daily seismic events. That's not a cool thing to do. You know, there might be PFAS in solar panels, but we're not injecting solar panels underground. And we're certainly not injecting things like Coca-Cola. Which needs to keep its recipe secret. Oil, people can choose whether they buy a Coke. They can't choose whether a company is going to inject these things underground near their groundwater. So I just wanted to make a point of that. And then the second thing is the industry doesn't think the public can handle this information. One of their arguments is going to be that if we knew what the chemicals were, it would scare us so much that we would get something that they are calling chemophobia. So I just wanted to sprinkle that on top for everybody. Just a little bit of fun there. One of their arguments. But anyway, I'm going to kick it off back to YUCCA. Thank you all again for letting me come on here and talk a little dance around the petition. Thanks.
Yeah, so could we go on to the next slide, please? We'll have an opportunity to actually act on this and address it as a community, as a collective. So starting on November 12th, the Oil Conservation Commission, also referred to as the OCC, will be holding public comment at 8:30 a.m. So starting at 8:30 a.m. until they run out of speakers. To hear about what your concerns might be, what information you might want to offer, or even simply what your experience has been in regard to just, contamination, pollution, or even simply if you're just concerned and afraid or scared or angry. So public comment will begin on November 12th at 8:30 a.m. This day will be prioritized for public comment. So up until there's no more speakers is when they will be hearing folks out. And then there will be other opportunities starting November 13th all the way to Friday the 15th to give comment between 8:30 a.m. to 9 a.m. and 4:30 p.m. to 5 p.m. So you can either go up to Santa Fe in the Roundhouse, or you can give your comment online on Zoom. But you do have to sign up for public comment by emailing the Oil Conservation Commission and attached. You should be receiving the links for public comment, but there's plenty of information. There's a one-pager that gives you more details of what PFAS is. We'd be happy to share this presentation with you. And then we have also developed some talking points that folks can use or use as a basis for your public comment. Can we go on to the next slide, please? Right, so what we do know is PFAS is highly toxic at tiny amounts and contaminates entire ecosystems. Exposure to PFAS leads to a public health crisis. The fact that you can develop cancers from exposure, from any type of exposure from PFAS in itself is a concern for our health. Trade secrets protects industry's ability to contaminate our health, land, air, and water. And the lack of enforcement and protection to ensuring that there's not spills or to ensure that this is not in our ground or surface water is rare. It's nearly non-existent. So please come out, give public comment starting November 12th. And feel free to use the talking points, use the resources we have made available to all of you, or simply just speak about your experience, whether that's been a direct experience, your concerns, your fears, your anger, your frustration, or even if you have any recommendations of how to move forward. The OCC would definitely want to hear that, and this is an opportunity to take action regarding PFAS. So now we will be moving on to a presentation from the No Fall Solutions Coalition, and I will pass it off to Alejandria.
Thank you, Enedith, and thank you to the YUCCA team for allowing us to have this short little space to give a debrief of all the travel that our coalition has been busy doing. For those of you that don't know me, Alejandria Lyons, I use she, her pronouns, and I'm based in Albuquerque, but I'm a Chicana organizer from Valencia County. And this coalition, I'm so proud of all the work. Everyone who's going to present tonight is a steering committee member. No Fall Solutions, we have 7 steering committee members. We are multi-generational. We are multi-cultural. And the main goal of our coalition is to create awareness of market-based false solutions that we know seek to commodify the sacred and capitalize off this climate crisis through different financializations of nature. And what we are doing right now is we're trying to change the political conversation. And we're doing this by making relationships with folks at the local, state, national, and even international level at times. And so we just wanted to share with you what our coalition has been up to over the summer as we get ready for this period leading up to the PFAS hearing and the New Mexico legislative session. So I'm really happy that Crystal Curley of Indigenous Lifeways was able to join us. This is a picture of some of the crew that went out that represented Indigenous Lifeways, Pueblo Action Alliance, New Mexico Social Justice and Equity Institute, YUCCA, and yeah, I just want Crystal to kick it off.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. I hope you can hear me good. My name is Crystal Curley. I'm the executive director of a nonprofit called Indigenous Lifeways, and we're located both in McKinley County and in Santa Fe. And so we're so lucky that we were able to be invited to New York and hold space. We have some incredible updates for y'all. So if you want to go to the next slide. One of the first meetings that we were able to go to as a coalition was a labor unions and environmental justice collaboration meeting. And what this initiative is doing is really ensuring that there's trust building, community involvement with labor unions and the workforce that are impacted by climate change and climate justice. And they work in several different areas of unions, like from the steel. There was representatives from people that work in like pipeline industry. There was also folks representing like Starbucks. The Starbucks union was there. And so, we're creating collaborations to really uplift the importance of having healthy, clean, equitable, livable wage, healthy jobs for our communities. And a lot of the people here in the photo are from frontline communities. They're all over the nation, coast to coast. So what we're doing as a coalition is getting involved in these national conversations and ensuring that not only the Southwest is included, but Indigenous voices are also represented in that circle. And so in the next few months, we'll be doing a lot of outreach, getting a campaign together on how will this look like for our community here, but also how will our values and what our non-negotiables are will be at a national level. So it's going to be really incredible to go along with this journey. And so there's more to come, and we'll go to the next slide. And while we were there, we were able to also do a press conference at the Urban Indigenous Collective. They're about a 10-minute walk from Times Square, and they're an incredible nonprofit organization, Indigenous women-led organization that does so many incredible work. If you follow them on Instagram, you'll see all the things that they do. They also host the Indigenous Peoples Day event that just happened this month. But while we were there in New York, we were able to host a press conference live that Pueblo Action Alliance was able to live stream. And the link is there if you'd like to see the full hour-long press conference that we were able to do. It was incredible. You'll get to hear from a lot of the members a lot of the organizations that were able to go to New York. And then if you go to the next slide. So why did we go to New York for Indigenous Lifeways? We are in McKinley County, about I'd say like 30 miles east of Gallup. There's Escalante power plant that's an old coal fire plant that they're proposing to retrofit into a hydrogen power plant, which will use water electrolysis to extract the hydrogen. And so that's why we went to New York, is to get that narrative out into a national level. But before we went, like 2 days before we left New York, we were able to host the McKinley Climate Week. This was also the same day and the same time that YUCCA was also hosting their Climate Week event, and their climate strike action that happened on September 20th. And so this was our kickoff event, and really getting our community, both of our communities in Gallup and in Albuquerque, aware of these issues around climate. And so, we took this energy and all the good vibes from, these actions, and we were able to, hand deliver. You could go to the next slide now. We were able to hand deliver a letter to Blackstone. And so what Indigenous Lifeways and the New Mexico No Faults, or the New Mexico Social Justice and Equity Institute, we have done a tactic called Counting Coup, and it's indigenous tactic. It's from our Lakota relatives up north that use this in war. And so what it is that you touch your enemy without any bloodshed. You're also able to touch the enemy and able to go back home. And so this is what we were able to do. In that top left-hand corner, you see us talking to 2 representatives from Blackstone. We were able to hand deliver an opposition letter from our coalition, and also several resolutions from our local Navajo chapters opposing the hydrogen development in their communities. And so it was very successful. I think because we were there last year, the security guard remembered us, they remembered our efforts, and they're very in our favor. They said, I hope we don't see you next year, and I hope, everything that you came here, I hope it all works out in your favor. And so I think with someone like that, as a security guard, as someone that is a gatekeeper, that is on our side, we were able to make that connection and actually count coup with the enemy. So we're hoping next year, well, before I move on, there's also a Climate Justice Alliance. They were able to showcase our event on their website. So if you want to take a look at that link, that also has more information on what was said and more of our comments from our coalition members. But what we would like to do next year is propose a investment plan that we would like, big investors like this to actually invest in, and actually expose all the economic flaws in this proposal of hydrogen investment. There's so many, if you really look at the economic development part of it, it really showcases, it really replicates other boom and bust economies that McKinley County has been exposed to. So this is just, going along those same, same propaganda that they've used, like, oh, this is going to bring X amount of jobs, going to bring this amount of money in, but in actuality, it, caused a devastation. And I think that's it. I hope I got that in 5 minutes. I don't know if we want to go to the next slide and see if I'm done. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Everyone, my name is Zephyr Hadamil, and I'm a campaign organizer with YUCCA. So in terms of what we've been doing locally, I wanted to share a little bit about our time in Carlsbad. So myself and my colleague from YUCCA, Johnny, we spent time in Carlsbad for the Permian Basin Climate Justice Coalition Strategic Gathering. And we also made connections, as well as received a presentation from Somos, and they conducted a survey for workers who work in the oil and gas industry, those who want to just transition, to give them space to share what those barriers are, and among some of them being there's no like compensation offered for like mileage or gas for workers to receive English language education. And so that, being one of the barriers. We also received a presentation from one of our YUCCA members, Josie, who lives in Carlsbad, her and her family, as well as inviting us to her family home where we saw firsthand, the amount of pipelines, in her family's yard, 6 different ones spread across 4 different companies. And then lastly, we also went out to the field with the whole group and also with thermographers from Earthworks, who shared with us like the use of the cameras that they use to collect footage of, infrastructure that is emitting. And so, learning, how to use that and what it looks like being out in the field and recording these incidences, as well as they also shared with us footage that was captured east of Artesia in a place called Loco Hills. And when you zoom out on all of this footage, the landscape just like it actually looks like a birthday cake with all of the candles, like from all the flares. And so here's a couple of pictures, in terms of receiving presentations as well as being out in the field. Yeah, thank you. I think I can pass it on.
Watsi Hopa. Hi everyone. I hope you're having a good evening and thank you for joining us today. Yeah, and thank you everyone who's presented so far for all this information and just like, sharing everything that's happening right now. And I'll kind of introduce myself again. My name is Alicia. I use she, they pronouns are from the Pueblos of Laguna and Acoma. I'm the climate justice organizer for Pueblo Action Alliance, and I am here to talk about a recent visit to the state of Oaxaca in Mexico. We were invited to a continental gathering that was taking place in Oaxaca. You know, as indigenous people from the so-called US, we were invited to participate in this continental gathering that had intentions of building a continental alliance between organizations that are doing work to oppose big projects like pipeline development or like any type of like extractive industry. And in the spaces down south and in our Central America areas or communities, they refer to these as mega projects. And so here, this was a space for people to come from all over this continent and discuss the conditions that they're facing and discuss like the fights that we're taking on opposing these types of extractive projects that are negatively impacting our people. And so we heard firsthand accounts from folks from all over, like folks from Veracruz, Oaxaca, Chiapas, even down to South America. We had some folks from Peru and Bolivia discuss like what's going on and the purpose. And we even had, I want to also note that there was more folks from the northern area. We had people come from some Lakota relatives present and Indigenous relatives from Canada and the BC area, the Wet'suwet'en Nation. And so, yeah, we were here like sharing stories, but also in a way to where we're making connections, like, seeing how these projects are connected to each other, but also seeing how coming from these different like settler nations, they're like financing these projects that are in turn negatively impacting indigenous communities in Central and South America. And what's interesting is here, oh, I guess I didn't delete this picture right here of the little pig business dude, but underneath that is like a photo of some folks that were present there. It was a really huge gathering. But those were some significant people and some good connections that we made. And to the right is actually like a map of some of the pipeline infrastructure in the country of Mexico. And you can see how it's connecting to our state in the Permian Basin. Um, they don't have any like pipelines illustrated directly going into the state, but you can see them meeting in Texas. But it was just really eye-opening to hear, these firsthand accounts and to learn that Mexico actually, like 90% of Mexico's oil comes from the United States. And with the knowledge of, the Permian Basin being like the most like the biggest oil producer of oil, the biggest producer of oil for this country, we're definitely making those connections and seeing how it's impacting indigenous people here. Um, so yeah, I think it really draws attention to also like, this international space and how the contribution of like big wealthy states like the US um, is negatively impacting folks from all over, not just here. With things like the North American Free Trade Agreement, we heard some direct accounts of talking about like people naming that as a thing that has led to um, like negative consequences, sorry, of the communities in South America and in Central America. So I don't know, I'm just really grateful to have been invited to that space and for those folks reaching out to us, because we do have a responsibility being indigenous and in the belly of the beast and like seeing how we can create these relationships with indigenous communities from all over the world, because we're seeing like private industry and wealthy nation states doing the same thing with each other. So it's like, in order to combat that scale of colonialism, extractive colonialism, we must like be doing the same thing with our organizing and making these global relationships. Um, and so, yeah, I really appreciate also the work coming out of the NFS coalition in addressing like, what is it called? Market-based mechanisms and like climate financing, because, folks that are organizing in Central and Southern America are also calling those out as being things that are directly impacting them. So yeah, I think this work that we're doing is growing, and we should continue to build these relationships with people who are doing this in other local indigenous communities all over the world. And I think, there was a what is it called? Declaration that came out of this gathering as to what this alliance is going to look like moving forward. So I'll drop that in the chat as well. Um, and you all can read up on that. You probably will have to translate it if you're not bilingual in Spanish. But yeah, I appreciate your time and hope you got something meaningful out of what I just said. Pass it back to y'all, Yucca. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you to all the presenters this afternoon. So you might be wondering, what does PFAS has to do with what NFS is doing? What is visiting New York, the Permian, going to Oaxaca? What does that have to do, right? So one of our mottos, and something that we continuously hear from our movement elders at the Los Jardines Institute, is that it's critical to think globally and act locally. In the instance of showing solidarity to these large energy projects, these large market financing, and the commodification of the climate crisis on the global scale is having an impact locally on us. In the sense that these decisions that are being made by world leaders, by these large corporations who have global influence, are actively polluting and contaminating and putting at risk the health of communities, putting at risk our futures as young people. And so it's important that we show solidarity and build relationships with folks who are in the global south, with indigenous communities across the global south, across Turtle Island, and just internationally, but also ensure that our fights are hyper local, and especially using the information that we learn from our partners, from our colleagues, and using it as a tool for our fights at the local ground level. Because a lot of the mega projects that we're seeing, the development of hydrogen, the use of PFAS, is commonly used in other places. These injustices are normalized, these practices are normalized just across the board. And frankly, at the end of the day, our communities are the ones that have to suffer because of it. So, I really appreciate all of you coming on with us today to learn about PFAS contamination. I wanted to highlight what Mariel Nanasasi had put in the chat, that 1 tablespoon of PFAS is enough to contaminate 2 times the capacity of the Elephant Butte Reservoir. And oil and gas operations are particularly dangerous because there are many different pathways of contamination. So we have to disrupt those different pathways because PFAS is getting in our water, in our air, because of flaring from the oil and gas operations, and it's just too risky, right? So all these initiatives, while they might sound good at the global scale, while they can be deceiving to make it seem as though world leaders are taking action when it comes to climate change, when it comes to environmental injustice, environmental racism, that is not always the case. So we find it as a coalition, as individual organizations, we find it important to build and foster relationships simply within each other here in New Mexico, but also outside of New Mexico, and acting locally, taking that action locally to ensure that our communities are not left behind. The injustices that our communities have faced are addressed, and that, we're actively a part of the process of what it means to build a better future, what it means that we want to see invested in our communities, and what we want our future to look like without continuing these practices of harm, without continuing these cycles of injustice. So I really appreciate all of you really coming on and listening from us today. YUCCA at the moment is currently collecting information of what your experience might have been or is with the climate crisis in this very moment, and what it is that you want to see moving forward, what it is that you want to see addressed. I will open it up for questions or any comments folks may have. But as a general call to action that we all can begin taking now is please come out to give public comment, whether it's virtually through email or in person, for the PFAS rulemaking in support of the rule. And please just share what your concerns are as a community member, or share what it is that you want to be heard. I want to thank all of the speakers who came on tonight to give this quick teach-in, to give a brief, overview of the work that we've been doing. And I want to thank all of the participants who also have joined. We really can't do this work without you. And it's going to take all of us to ensure that that justice is the forefront for, our futures, especially when it comes to confronting the climate crisis. So, thank you, folks. Please share any questions you may have. We'll stay on a little bit more to answer them. And if you need more information for the rulemaking petition, let us know. Feel free to email us and we'll be happy to support you. Thank you, everyone.